Yo, boys and girls, what's going on? It's your boy Peter here, aka Peter Freako 10, baby. For you guys, episode of the Movie Review Show, where the good movies are always reviewed. Okay, back into our movie review. And on today's episode, we gotta talk about something. Any genre can find itself in a bad place at any time, whether it be oversaturation or quality. And in this case, the comic book genre has fallen victim to that, or fell victim to that, however you want to say it, from oversaturation and quality in general, because some of the people they get aren't as much of a fan of the source material as they want to admit, or time, money, and the wrong place at the wrong time. Because wait a little bit when we have the right effects, because as great as the effects that we have, they aren't up to snuff to bring a particular film to life. The comic book genre needs a better place to go. They need people who understand the source material, and they need people who at least can bring a decent film to the screen. And that happened quite a few times in the 90s. There are films that did it right, but there needs to be a game changer. And I think that's where today's film comes in, because today's film is an interesting adventure for its lead star, the director, and the character that it's based on, being that I do not think many people knew who this character was before the movie. And what film is that, you may be asking? Well, today, boys and girls, we are talking about Blade. Hell yeah, baby. So, how does Blade do for the comic book genre, and how does it bring it back on its feet? Well, grab your swords, grab your cool-ass jackets, grab your shades, and let's talk about Blade. Now, Blade was a movie made in 1998, and this is directed by Stephen Norrington. Now, Stephen Norrington, this is actually a guy who started doing work on special effects for films like Aliens and Split Second. But in terms of directing, he had directed a horror movie called Death Machine, which I actually got over there. I actually plan to review it for Halloween. I will give my thoughts on that when I watch it. But that was like his only directing job that he had did up to this point. And like I said, this is actually based on a comic book series of the same name from the Marvel line, and the comic book character of Blade, which made his first appearance back in 1973 in Tomb of Dracula issue 10, and was created by Marv Wolfman. And he would go on to cameo in other comic book series of the Marvel line before getting his own series in 1994. And the idea to do a Blade movie actually originally came about when New World Pictures had got their hands on Marvel properties, and they were asking which properties would be great to get a movie out of. Marv suggested his character Blade, and they managed to get as far as getting a script going by Lee Goldberg, a crime author, and had his hand in a few TV shows such as Sequest DSV and The Cosby Mysteries, and Bill Rabkin of Baywatch and Spencer for Hire fame. Sadly, this project didn't go anywhere though, and the idea was pushed to the side. Then something big comes that in 1989 changes the comic book landscape. Tim Burton's Batman is released, and it changes how people viewed comic book movies, and it becomes one of the highest grossing films of the year, and kickstarting a new fandom of those comics, and ushering in other studios to get in on the action. Canon with Captain America and Fantastic Four, which never got released, and their failed Spider-Man movie. The Crow with Miramax. Universal with The Shadow. 20th Century Fox, who is getting an X-Men movie off the ground. Can't wait to check that out. Hollywood Pictures with Judge Dredd. MGM with Tank Girl. And of course, New Line, who had done The Mask, which proved to be a big hit in 1994, and Spawn in 1997, which, while I like the film, the reception does not reflect that. New Line showed interest in getting a Blade movie going, which caught the attention of David S. Goyer, who at that point written low-budget movies such as Demonic Toys, Death Warrant, Kickboxer 2, and had just come off the torturous experience of writing The Crow's City of Angels, which was fucked around by executives of the studio. He had also penned scripts for other Marvel properties that haven't been made, such as Ghost Rider and Doctor Strange. He convinced them that he was the right guy to get the film going, and while New Line, originally wanting a smaller budgeted movie, proposed that a better idea would be to get a trilogy going out of this Blade character. New Line agreed to the idea, and the original idea of making a smaller budget in the $8 million range went to almost $50 million. And he started writing the script for the movie, setting out to make a vampire movie that was raw, dangerous, and moved away from the Anne Rice a la Interview with a Vampire sort of feel movies that were being shoved in everybody's faces. Something that New Line originally wanted him to do. But David fought against this as he did not want the film to be a spoof. He also wanted to update the comics for a 90s audience, thus adding in a little bit to his origins and the weapons that he used, whereas in the comics he was a human who fought vampires and used dagger. The movie took a completely different approach that I'll touch upon later, and New Line seemed to be on board with everything and gave the go-ahead. While Goyer was writing the script, the team sought out various directors to handle the movie. These include Ernest Dickerson of Demon Knight fame, who was on the film for a bit, but he dropped out. Other directors that were considered: David Fincher, who had previously worked with them on Seven, and even Sam Raimi. Finally, though, the team settled on Stephen Norrington due to his work on Death Machine. Then it came time to find a good Blade. The team looked at people like LL Cool J, Richard Roundtree, Denzel Washington, hell, even Lawrence Fishburne was considered. But Goyer could see nobody else but Wesley Snipes, who he had wrote the script with Wesley in mind to play the character, which coincidentally, he had actually signed on to do another unmade Marvel project, Black Panther, that at the time was taking a long time to get made. He was sent the Blade script and dropped out of Black Panther to work on Blade despite no knowledge of the character. With that, the team got the rest of the cast together and they set out to work on the movie. The movie was shot a good chunk in California. Some sets were built, but a couple were actually shot in real-life abandoned buildings. Because Wesley had a history in action and martial arts, he insisted that the movie had a lot of martial arts action, and he brought in his fight choreographer to handle the fight scenes so they came off more in the vein of a Hong Kong action movie. For the makeup effects, they brought in Greg Cannon, who had a hand in one of the biggest hits of 1997, Titanic. He had already had a history with Norrington due to the fact that he worked with him on various other movies, while the CGI was handled by Flat Earth Production. Wesley became more involved in the movie as it went along, that he even got a producing credit on it. Things seemed to be going well on both sides, but there were numerous occasions the team found themselves butting heads with New Line over certain things, which included scenes they wanted cut or changed, some for pacing, or some because they thought it would offend some of the audience. New Line was also very worried about the final product and what it would come to be, considering the fact that the year before they had just put out Spawn, and being that they let Mark A.Z. DePay run rampant making that movie, they didn't think the final product would turn out as well as they hoped. So they were nervous, especially since Blade was a character that not too many people knew about. They were nervous if anybody was going to go see it. Adding on to that, Marvel was experiencing a little bit of hard times, being that they were almost on the verge of bankruptcy. And some reshoots had to be done due to the test audiences not liking the original ending. New Lines found themselves at a bit of a gamble with this movie. But I think their worries subsided on August 21st, 1998. Blade opened in theaters, and it opened to #1 at the box office, finally knocking Saving Private Ryan off the top. And in its first weekend alone, the movie grossed over $17 million at the box office, made over $64 million. We'll get more on the final result later, but it did much better than Batman and Robin's lowly $16 million opening, and it gave Marvel the boost that it needed. On the reception side, the movie has seen mixed to positive reviews from critics, as on the critics side, it carries a 58%. Critics praised the movie for its action, Wesley Snipes' performance, Norrington's direction, and the special effects. Hell, Roger Ebert, of all people, awarded this 3 out of 4 stars. So if a movie can get Roger Ebert to like it, you know it's done something right. While some critics were critical of the film for being all style and no substance, some of the CGI work, and some felt the story was weak, which I disagree on. However, audience are laughing at that shit, as on that side is a 78% and on IMDb is a 7.1 out of 10. And deservedly so. I had no idea who Blade was, and that probably has a lot to do with the fact that despite reading Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man, I did move away from Marvel. I did start reading comics like The Darkness, Spawn, Acclaim's Turok, those sort of comics. But when the trailer for this movie was posted online, I was interested to see it. I went in based on the knowledge that I saw a fun movie, rather than just it being a comic book feature. So I figured I'd take a night out to do a double feature of this and Dead Man on Campus, which I will also review. I sat back in the chair. I gotta be honest, man. This movie's fucking awesome. And I don't know where to begin. Despite me liking Spawn a lot, I think this is the movie that people were hoping Spawn was gonna be. And I think this is honestly, to me, one of the most badass comic book movies I've seen since The Crow. And even not knowing it was a comic book film made the film even better because Wesley benefits the movie. And I'm going to get deeper into that later. But yes, there are some changes like I mentioned earlier. But the changes, I feel, work for the film and its story that they are trying to tell. I'll explain why later, though. But like I said, the cast in this film, you got Wesley Snipes as Eric Brooks, a.k.a. Blade, who some might know from Major League, Passenger 57, Drop Zone, Demolition Man. You have Stephen Dorff from The Gate. You have Kristofferson from A Star is Born, Fire Down Below, and Millennium. And Wright from Squeeze. Donald Logue from Sneakers and Jerry Maguire. But those are like the main actors. Other people, you got Udo Kier, who was in Johnny Mnemonic, the hot-ass Tracy Lords from Skinner and Crybaby. But anyway, getting to this plot of the movie. The plot is basically we meet this man named Eric, or Blade, played by Wesley Snipes, who when he was born, his mother, played by Sana Lathan, died giving birth to him. As we see, she was bitten by a vampire. Years later, he's grown up, and he now goes by the name The Daywalker, as well as Blade, as despite having half vampire, he still possesses a little bit of human in him. And he doesn't go down by any of the vampire's natural weaknesses and uses his ability that he's gained as a child to hunt vampires and avenge his mother with the help of this man named Whistler, played by Kristofferson. Meanwhile, we see in the vampire side of things that they are being led by this guy, who I'm going to butcher his name here, Gaetano, played by Udo Kier, who wants to maintain a sense of truth and balance among them and the humans, which keep getting broken by Blade, as well as Deacon Frost, played by Stephen Dorff, who feels they should be ruling over the humans and killing them instead of hiding amongst them. So Deacon decides that in order to do that, he is going to try and awaken this vampire god named Lamarja, which draws in this woman named Karen, played by Wright, who they are after, as now she knows vampires exist. So now Blade needs to protect her, all the while stop Frost from reawakening this vampire god. Will Blade be able to stop Frost? Or will he reawaken this vampire god that not even Blade himself can stop? Now, I already mentioned how this is a Marvel comic book series, and starting off with the series itself, from what I've seen of it, on the surface, I gotta give props to Marvel for touching an area that they were never known for touching. An area that you never thought they would touch. And that being horror, especially when you look at the brand itself and how it focuses on being colorful and having these heroic poses while having these themes touched upon in a way that a kid could understand it, while also an adult reading it could see what they were going for, as opposed to like Image, Top Cow, and Valiant, which are very daring and touch upon dark themes and more so geared towards adults. So with Blade, the comic book series, it was refreshing to see them go into an area like vampires and horror. And I think when you look at the comics, you look at what they have in there, it has all the makings of a great movie. And when this was announced, I wouldn't blame people for being worried about it, especially in the story department. If those that were seeing the dailies and all that were worried about it being toned down, especially in the story department. So if you're one of those people who was worried, did they pull it off? Well, I'm pretty sure we have some people in the comments saying they fucked it up. You're wrong, because on the surface itself, the story all around is great. Because first off, it's very true and faithful to the comic. There's some minor changes that, in all honesty, I think benefit the movie. And I think it does some things that I find better than the actual comic. I find it interesting, the whole theme of this sort of half human, half vampire gaining these powers to basically deal with those who got him into this state. It's sort of a horror version of a superhero origin story, which I think made it stand out among the pack. And the changes made to the character of Blade, I thought were interesting. In particular, starting off, the weapon, his dagger, is replaced with a sword. He's more of a martial artist in the movie. And in the comics, he was basically he was just a human hunting vampires. But I love that. I like that the movie goes out of its way to humanize Blade, where despite being this badass, he wants to use it for good. He's still fighting the side effects of being a vampire, like the thirst for blood, where you see him dealing with that scene where he's strapped down to the chair and he's being injected. And it does a great job humanizing him. And it shows him dealing with the need for blood. And I really think it added a layer of empathy to him, as well as a sense of control to his character that is a flaw that he has to deal with. And when he gets out there and starts fighting, you buy him as this badass. He's not mopey and dopey, crying the whole time. He's not doing the whole, oh, feel bad for me routine. None of that. He knows that the powers are with him and he must use them to protect the world. So when the action happens, you buy him as this badass and you root for him. And you get an idea of how he's able to do that. And the story itself, I love just the style to it, with this sort of music video 90s flair that I felt made it its own. It's not trying to copy Anne Rice or Interview with a Vampire, which I feel so many movies have done, which those films did it because they have the right people attached, and then afterwards they spawn these myriads of just imitators that really didn't understand what made Interview with a Vampire work. It just came off as hokey and cheap in some areas. But this just has this grungy sort of heavy metal feel that is more up my alley, as opposed to, say, Steel or Batman and Robin, which is very kiddie. I guess you could say the closest to this was Spawn, but that was held back by the PG-13 rating, despite how much I love that film, and the effects look a bit unfinished in the hell portion. But here we have a comic book movie that feels the closest to The Crow's grungy heavy metal feel, which I have been waiting for a long time, and it doesn't feel entirely copying and pasting that film. And it also goes for it with the R rating, and it doesn't hold back in its themes, in its plot in various areas, what it touches upon, even just in the opening itself. So it takes a lot of risks, which I respect, and being like, okay, we're going for it with these R rating. We're going to be R rated from the start. Let's make it for adults. Something that we haven't seen up to this point. Because while we had Tim Burton's Batman and we had all those other films, they also were reminded, okay, it's going to be adult, but remember we have kids watching too. This doesn't do that. This doesn't have those limitations, so I appreciate that. And also going with the story, I also like in the story itself how the vampire world itself is tied into the human world, and the vampires have their hand in everything. And despite having their hand in everything, they live by this oath to having a truce with the humans and not cause a scene. But in the middle is Deacon Frost, who feels they should be ruling the humans and will do anything to see that happening, even if it means killing his master. Which, yes, I know the character is different in the comics, being a little bit more of an older gray-haired dude, as opposed to a Hot Topic guy. But clearly that's what they were going for. More of a teenage vampire who doesn't know his limits, with a sort of
rebellious teen vibe to him, which, yeah, when I first heard about it, I was one of those guys who was wondering, am I going to be able to take this guy seriously? But the movie takes its time to show how much of a threat he is. And credit also has to go to the writing by David S. Goyer and Stephen Dorff himself getting a lot out of the actor. But yeah, I think the story itself is great. It does a great job respecting the comics while also doing its own thing that I feel improves upon the world created in the comics. And I think it also moves at a fast pace. There never gets a sense that there's a moment of dullness, and each scene just has something going for it that builds upon the energy set by the scene before. And I think a lot of that has to do with Stephen Norrington as a director, who, yes, you can tell this is a music video director, as there are a lot of ways that you could tell that the movie is shot with the feel of a music video, and there's some moments that it is very music video-ish. But I feel Stephen uses that in a way that works. And I think it has a lot to do with how the day and night scenes are done, because the daytime scenes are shot more akin to a real movie. They're shot with a lot of establishing shots, they're shot with steady cams, and they're more telling a story about the characters. Like when we first see Blade in his hideout and he pulls in, you have the establishing shot of him pulling in, Bad Moon Rising is playing, kind of establishing this is his hideout. Whistler's the inventor, and later on you see Bush Wright waking up and looking through stuff, and she starts looking at the store, and it wakes up, kind of showing how smart Blade is and how he thinks ahead. There's more of an emphasis on character development in which those scenes are shot to tell a lot about a character, and I love that. However, when nighttime falls, the film's directing style changes into a sort of music video with a lot more of an emphasis on music video editing, like day to night transitions. Some of the shots, like when Blade is driving in a car, you have this sort of like he's driving, but you can tell the car is still, but in the background, it has that sort of sitcom, like driving background. And there's also some quick cuts of some of the vampires and people looking back and forth like this a bit while they're completely still, which in some areas, some people may be annoyed by it. I personally loved it. I thought how it tied into how different night is today in that area as opposed to daytime was perfect. And it really establishes a different form of an atmosphere, kind of setting up how this is the stomping ground of vampires. And the use of the camera is a lot different. There's a lot of hand-celled shots. There's a lot of shaky cam, CGI camera swoops that give these moments a lot of energy, especially in the fight scene. Those moments have a great use of sets, some of which being shot on location, which I applaud, like the hospital in the opening, which was actually an abandoned asylum. So you get a lot of authenticness in the scenes. But the sets that are built, I think, are fantastically crafted, like the nightclub in the opening that have the sprinklers up and they're spraying the blood on the vampires. That's one of my favorite sets in the movie. And I feel Stephen shoots the scene with a lot of energy, a great use of the color palette, great using the atmosphere to his advantage. And it's just an atmosphere that you haven't seen in superhero films. And you can tell that Stephen has studied action despite being a music video director. He studied the trips and tips of Wesley's other films or martial arts movies and action films in general, and they're shot with a lot of energy. Like I mentioned before, the different camera types also tie into the fight scenes. Little touches like that, I think, give the movie a lot of energy and don't feel boring to watch. And they feel different in some scenes. And I think a lot of that has to do also with Wesley Snipes and how he puts himself in these moments and bringing his own fight choreographer to help with the fight scenes. And when it comes to shooting the violence, he doesn't shy away from violence. The film's gore is shot gracefully. And just for a superhero movie, it's very fucking brutal. And I love that. I'll dive deep into that later when I talk about the effects. But you could tell Wesley was deep involved in the production and bringing his touch to the movie, and he really makes the film feel like there's a sense of ambition to it and love to this movie rather than just it being a studio superhero movie. So, yeah, I think the directing and Wesley's touch to the movie, I think really give it a lot of energy than I think people were willing to see. I also think the score to the movie is great. Mark Isham, who did a fantastic job with The Hitcher, does the great score in this. But I gotta say, I love the licensed music in that. I love when you have the fight at the end and you got the song Struck by Lightning, or when Blade's driving at night, you get DJ Crush's Yeah. Those little choices, I just feel, make the film so stylish and appealing to the eyes. It just doesn't feel like a movie anybody could have made. And like, you don't feel like this is this sort of music video film. You don't feel like this is an effects show. You really feel like this is a director taking what he learned watching action films and really applying it to this movie. And I love that. Whereas so many other movies, like you look at Spawn earlier, that just, you could tell that was an effects guy making it. As much as I like the film, that has an effects director written all over it. Here, Stephen is a music video director, but he uses his music video talents to basically give the film its identity instead of using it as just a show for music video directing. He does it to really give the film a style. But like I said, credit also has to go to Wesley Snipes.
Speaking of Wesley, the acting in this movie is also great. And of course, I have to give a huge amount of love to Wesley. I think he was perfectly cast as Blade. And I really think the character wouldn't work as well because I doubt anybody else they could have gotten to play this character would work as well as he did, considering how deeply involved with this film he became. Not only do I feel like he looks the part and has the qualities that make the character of Blade what little fan base he had loved, but Wesley also brings his own touch to the character that really are respectful to his original variation. But to me also, I find myself preferring this version of Blade over the comics. He plays it like a badass, I gotta say. He gives him this cold, take no prisoners attitude while also giving him some good one-liners, like the scene in the hospital when the people tried to shoot him and it bounces off his armor. He goes, "Motherfucker, you out of your damn mind?" That had me dying. And I feel that scene in particular when she finds out about his past and she's confronting him, I really feel that shows Wesley's range as an actor beyond this action star that people see him as, and he's able to emote when the script needs him to. And you really buy it from him and his delivery. And the suit looks great. I like the long jacket. Because I looked at the one in the comic, I just thought it looked laughable. I thought this looked badass. I really thought it looked cool. I like the glasses, the haircut. It just really looks great. And I like the sword he has. Also, I like that it senses his hands, and if anybody else tries to grab it or pick it up, it senses their hands, and the knife pops out and it cuts off their hands. There's also this boomerang knife thing that he throws around and kills everybody around him, and it'll come back into his hand. And there's these stakes that he shoots, and he impales people to the wall. Like, the prop design in this movie is really cool. You can tell they were having a really lot of fun when they were designing them. And it wasn't embarrassing. I really feel it looked cool, and you compare this to, say, Shaq and what he did with Steel, which looked absolutely horrible, and he looked like he was struggling in the action portions, in particular the scene when he's chasing the kid through the tracks. You can tell that he's having a rough time running, and the reason being in that movie is because they couldn't find a stunt double for him. Unlike Wesley, who has no problem doing the action scenes, and you can tell he did a good chunk of his stunts with no problems. Even if there was a double, they do a great job hiding it. But can't sing enough praises to Wesley. He was great. Stephen Dorff is a hoot to watch, playing this little twerpy, stuck-up vampire that at times comes across as this very gothy teenager in his behavior. He looks like someone you'd find at Hot Topic. That's the best way you would describe him. But clearly that's what they were going for. And at first you don't buy this guy as a villain, but the way he's written, where his whole arc is he believes that vampires should give up this whole piece with the humans and feels destroying them is the better way to go and really dominating them. So you can understand and you can kind of get behind his thought process, especially when vampires have been portrayed as these creatures of the night that he's read about, and they've destroyed every fucking opportunity to rule over them. On top of the fact that Blade is making things harder by killing his group. Especially the lengths that he goes to try and bring back this god that he feels will help him and convince his ruler that they should be ruling over the humans. So I think Stephen Dorff takes the weight of being a villain really well. I think him and Wesley share some great tensions in the scene they share together, especially that scene in the street when he has the child and he's threatening him. Just a great villain you love to hate. Ambush Wright, she does very well as she's basically this woman Blade is protecting, and she's in a hospital doing an autopsy, but Blade saves her. She's not the typical love interest with I respect, but rather an accomplice of Blade, and without taking the role of that, she still feels like a big part of the movie. She even gets to partake in the fight at the end, so she's not a damsel in distress, which I appreciate. There were a couple moments of dialogue that I felt could have been delivered a bit better from her. In particular, when Blade drops her off back at her apartment and he tells her to be careful. Now that she knows that there's vampires, she goes, "But it's daytime!" I really don't like that line, and just how she delivered it could have been so much better to me personally, or not sound as squeaky as she did in that scene. But I do feel as the film goes along, she does get better, especially in the scenes that she does share with Wesley. I think that's where her acting shines a lot, especially since they weren't going for the romance angle that so many of these type of films go for. So while a couple deliveries here and there could have been better, and Bush did well for what she was given. But the best part, or one of the best parts of this movie, is Kristofferson as Whistler, who's this guy who found Blade when he was a kid and took him in as his own, and he sort of plays the father figure, which I know that character wasn't in the comics, but they put him in this one. But I think he's another one of the best additions. I think that has a lot to do with Kristofferson and how much of a charismatic actor he is. He plays the character of Whistler with a sort of father figure side to him, and you see him having Blade's back in a lot of moments. Like, he has to inject the blood into him so he doesn't feed on other people. And I like the fact that he has someone to play off, and that there was someone who didn't see him as this monster, but rather saw him as a sympathetic light. And I like the moments of him defending Blade in the battlefield, like the part where he drives the truck into that glass area. So much so, when you see the character's fate at the end of the movie, it makes it sad, because the chemistry the two had is very believable and heartfelt in a lot of moments. I do wish there was more scenes of the two together, because it's really more about him and Ambush Wright and him protecting her, with him being sprinkled in here and there until they take the character where they do. But that really shows the great performance of Kris. Other actors, you got Donald Logue as this assistant to Deacon, where there's this running gag that whenever Blade finds him, he chops off his hands. Udo Kier as Deacon's master, who keeps trying to slap some sense into him. Arlo Jover as this one vampire who works for Deacons and at times is Deacon's sugar mama. Tracy Lords in the opening as this vampire who lures this guy into this rave. Clint Curtis is also in this. Yeah, the guy from Deep Rising. My friend Kyle would definitely know who he is. He played Billy in that movie. He's the guy who got spit up by the creature, and he's like this, and his whole face is like this, and you see him skin melting. He's this guy in the morgue who looks at the dead bodies. He doesn't say much, but I'm like, oh shit, Billy from Deep Rising. Another surprise I saw in this movie was the character of Pearl, who I'll talk about later when I get into effects. But he's this huge, fat vampire who keeps records of other vampires and the work they do. Under that makeup, that's Eric Edwards. I shit you not. For those who don't know, Eric Edwards, that's the guy who was Murph in Problem Child 2 and 3. For those who haven't seen Problem Child 2, he's the kid in the red shirt that tried to beat up Junior in class, and he's like, "Who let the baby into the 6th grade? What's in your bag? Your diapers? No, my lunch, you pinhead." That kid. He was also in Senior Trip. I didn't know that till I saw the cast, and I'm like, oh shit, Murph's here. So the cast is stacked in this movie. A lot of good people here. And while you do have a couple moments of M. Bush Wright who could have given a couple scenes better and some more screen time with Kristofferson that could have been needed, overall I think the acting is very good. But of course, being this is a horror movie and also an action film, you gotta talk about the special effects. First thing you gotta talk about is the makeup effects by Greg Cannon, which I think they look great. I appreciate they didn't try to make them look pretty like every other vampire movie out there, but instead they went with this grungy, metal, Hot Topic look to them that I think made them look grotesque and cool in a way that gave them their own identity. Like, it made each vampire you came across had some sort of personality that you could tell one from the other, and they didn't make them look and feel the same. But the effects on Pearl, oh my god, that's one of the best effects in this movie to me personally. Just how it was filmed, how big they made it look, like how they made the skin look, which really put a damper on the effects crew because they had to get a forklift to move that damn thing in there. So it was quite the burden, but I'm glad they pulled through and got it to look as good as they did. And it does not shy away from showing some great practical gore. I mean, you get all kinds of violence in this movie. A vampire gets thrown into a light rod and gets electrocuted. People get shot. Practical blood squibs. One guy gets his throat ripped out and thrown at another guy. Later on, there's a point when this one vampire is at the morgue being looked over and he comes alive and bites a huge chunk out of this one guy, like right here. And it's practically bloody and he falls onto the floor and he's like, his blood is literally squirting out. So the violence is made even more vicious and real with how practically it was done. Even with the fight scenes being done on an actual set with rods and people jumping around to avoid each other, it's helped especially by Wesley's contribution, who makes those scenes stand out. There is CGI, which the CGI studio enough, like I mentioned, is the same people who did the effects for Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Thankfully, these look better than that. I think the CGI looks great because it doesn't overly rely on it. It's used in the right moments. And it was used in moments that I think you had to do CGI. There was no moment they could have pulled it off practically. And I think it looks cool. In particular, when Blade kills somebody, they'll turn into dust, which is where CGI is used, which I actually think creates a cool visual of the bones going up and the dust when they're stabbed with the spike. Or it's used to add something to a particular scene, in particular the fight in the subway tunnel and all those trains are going by. It's obviously CGI, but that moment I can also understand, especially when it comes to safety. And it doesn't look that bad. You compare this to Spawn, where you have that shitty looking hell that looks absolutely fake with the green screen, the CGI topped on that. That CGI is horrible. This is leagues above that. So the movie knows when to pick and choose between practical and CGI and or mixing the two together. And it doesn't feel heavily reliant on one or the other. And actually uses the CG in unique ways that I feel makes it stand out. But yeah, there is so fucking much to this movie that I feel rises above the other comic book films. And it's just great to have a horror film like this that dares to take risk and not play it safe. Something these comic book films have been doing for the longest time. I already touched upon a couple of the cons already, but the last one I did have a problem with was the final battle. Not because it was a bad battle, but it just felt very short. And in order to talk about this, I'm going to have to spoil a little bit. So here's a spoiler warning there at the end. But Deacons awakens the god, and it becomes a part of him. And it doesn't feel like there's any imagination when he gets the power. He's still in his human form. He's just able to run fast and reform himself when being killed. Despite this movie making it seem like he'll do these crazy things that will make a vampire feel powerful and other vampires will fear him. I didn't feel that in the end. It just came across more as a video game power-up rather than a force of nature not to be reckoned with. But I know that ending was reshot, but even from what I heard, the original ending sounded stupid. You can tell this was where David S. Goyer was running out of ideas and didn't know how to make the final battle fulfilling. I would have been more pleased if they just sold the god in a way that took over Deacon and his body allowed him to become a creature, and it basically showed that they both wanted the same thing and they would work together in that one body. And he was taller than Blade and could have an epic fight at the end. And there's some cool aspects in the final, especially how he finishes off Deacon with the syringes. But it just felt very short in how he takes him down. And the power has more in line with the power-up that you find in a video game. That could have made the film much better. But that's really the other problem I had, because bottom line, Blade is one of the best comic book films I've seen in a while. It's fast-paced, snarling, red meat biting good time. So if you're a vampire and you like some red meat eating action, I highly recommend Blade. It really shows what you can do with a comic book movie when you have the right people behind it. So when it comes down to it, I give Blade a 9.7 out of 10, and it deserves it. Therefore gets the Alexandra seal of approval. Definitely want to check out if you like vampire movies and you like comic book films, you want a good one for once, this is your movie. But that's my review for Blade, and next time I am going to do a review of Child's Play 2, as I just reviewed the first one for ScreamFest, and this will be coming. So I'm going to talk about that next in prep for Bride of Chucky, and then I'm also going to talk about Child's Play 3, so you guys will see my thoughts on those soon. But for right now, I will see you guys later. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of Blade. Is this your favorite comic book film? What is your favorite comic book film? Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.